Your wife is gone, old man. She's dust in the ground, and it is high time you woke up and joined the 21st century. That was the first thing Victoria Sterling ever said to me, screaming over the roar of diesel engines as her yellow bulldozers tore into my fence line at dawn. No warning, no permits, just raw entitlement carving an $8,000 scar of concrete right through the heart of my active cattle pasture. The air was thick with the acrid taste of diesel smoke, choked with the sound of steel tracks crushing the sweet bluestem grass that my 30 head of prize black Angus rely on to survive the winter. And as I ran out there, heart hammering against my ribs, shouting that this was a working ranch, she just leaned against the hood of her pristine white Model X, smirking, waving a sheaf of papers that looked legitimate from a distance, but smelled like fraud even from 50 yards away. "Your cows can eat somewhere else," she yelled back, holding up her phone to film my reaction. Progress waits for no one, especially not for sad old cowboys living in the past. What she forgot, or maybe what she was simply too arrogant to realize, is that this isn't just grass. This is Kronos' territory, my 2,200-pound champion bull who has ruled these 47 acres for 6 years with the authority of a king, a beast who treats intruders in his dining room with about as much patience as a chainsaw treats a sapling, and bulls, especially bulls like Kronos, really don't like shiny electric cars parked where they like to eat. 3 months later, her husband's brand-new luxury vehicle would be nothing but $100,000 worth of crumpled aluminum and shattered glass, a monument to the most legendary act of malicious compliance this county has ever seen. But to understand why the footage of that destruction is so satisfying, you have to understand the war that started it all. My name is Silas Red Thorne, and I've been running cattle on Ironwood Creek Ranch since before most of these new suburbanites knew the difference between a hoof and a horn, inheriting this land from my grandfather back in '95, keeping the legacy alive through droughts and floods. For 28 years, I've watched the sun paint these hills purple and gold every morning, the smell of damp hay always reminding me of Eleanor, my wife who passed away 18 months ago, taken by a cancer that moved faster than a prairie fire, leaving me with nothing but a silent house and a ranch that felt too big without her voice echoing off the barn walls. Grief is a strange thing. It stretches time out until a single day feels like a decade, leaving you with too much silence and not enough purpose. And just as I was drowning in that silence, they started building Emerald Valley Estates, a sprawling infection of stucco and glass that crept across the valley floor, 200 cookie-cutter mansions sprouting up where good corn used to grow, each house worth more than my entire operation. Suddenly, I was surrounded by neighbors who thought grass was something you looked at, not something you farmed. People who complained about the sound of roosters, but paid triple for farm-to-table eggs, wanting the aesthetic of the country without the grit of the reality. And then came Victoria, crashing into my life with the subtlety of a landslide, a 50-year-old former corporate shark from the West Coast who moved here thinking she could run our county like a hostile takeover, the 3-term president of the Emerald Valley HOA, wearing expensive athleisure, wear like battle armor, and driving that white Tesla with vanity plates that read, "ECO Love." A woman who treated every disagreement like a litigation opportunity. She brought that specific brand of passive-aggressive corporate warfare to our fence line, starting with noise complaints about the cattle, then certified letters about agricultural odors affecting property values, as if living next to a ranch shouldn't smell like a ranch, sending legal threats every Tuesday like clockwork, always copying her lawyer, always demanding I move my herd to make way for community standards. But here's the thing about property law that most folks don't know. Easements require explicit, written consent from the landowner for recreational use, and you can't just turn a historical emergency access road into a public bike path because you feel like it. Victoria, however, had dug up a dusty document from the 60s, a recreational easement she claimed ran right through my main pasture, the very pasture Kronos had claimed as his kingdom, a place where he would charge anything that moved wrong, even delivery trucks on the main road. The injustice hit me on a freezing Tuesday in October when I walked out to find surveyors already spray painting orange X's on my oak trees older than Victoria's entire family tree, preparing for her $80,000 bike path project without so much as a phone call. "Excuse me, this is private land," I yelled, my breath clouding in the cold air, but the surveyor just mumbled about HOA infrastructure and pointed to Victoria, who was standing by the fence, filming me with that predatory smile, thinking she had finally found the crack in my armor. She didn't know that 30 years of animal husbandry teaches you patience, and it teaches you that with the right conditioning, you can train almost any behavior into livestock. Within 48 hours, the legal war began in earnest, a thick manila envelope arriving via certified mail, a cease and desist order from a lawyer named Lionel Sneed, whose office was located in a strip mall between a vape shop and a payday lender, claiming I was unlawfully interfering with municipal development. She filed complaints with the county saying Kronos was a public safety risk, claiming he had menaced innocent joggers, who were actually her trespassing surveyors, and demanded the immediate relocation of my livestock or face seizure, implying that if I didn't move them, the city would move them to an auction house for me. That was the moment I decided to stop being a sad widower and start being a rancher again. So I drove into town and hired Julia Vance, a razor-sharp agricultural attorney who had spent 20 years defending farmers against suburban sprawl and didn't operate out of a strip mall. "Let's see this magical easement," Julia said, spreading the documents across her mahogany desk, and what we found made my blood boil and her eyes light up with the thrill of the hunt. The document Victoria was waving around was a forgery, and a bad one at that. The original 1960s filing was for emergency vehicle access only, fire trucks and ambulances, but Victoria had clumsily altered the text to include recreational cycling. And worse, she had forged my signature on a consent form, a signature that misspelled my own middle name, creating a document that was legally worthless but proved she was willing to commit felonies to get her way. Julia dug deeper and found that Victoria's law license in California had been suspended years ago for ethics violations involving forged client signatures, meaning she was practicing law without a license in our state, turning her terrifying legal threats into nothing more than evidence of criminal fraud. While Julia began building a countersuit that would eventually dismantle Victoria's life, I started my own project back at the ranch, utilizing the fact that animals are smarter than people give them credit for. I began a simple audio association training regimen for Kronos, playing recorded car alarm sounds during his feeding time, specifically the high-pitched chirp of luxury security systems, rewarding him with premium molasses-soaked oats whenever he moved toward the noise. The crunch of those oats became the soundtrack to my revenge, a daily ritual where I turned a 2-ton animal into a guided missile, unaware that Victoria was about to escalate the fight from legal bullying to actual environmental terrorism. As the weeks rolled on, Kronos was becoming a precision instrument, responding to the specific frequency of a Tesla alarm with a terrifying, singular focus, associating that electronic shriek with the sweet taste of molasses, trotting toward the sound with a purpose that would make a matador sweat. Meanwhile, Victoria, realizing her legal threats were bouncing off Julia Vance's ironclad defense, decided to shift tactics, launching a community health initiative that involved flooding every mailbox in Emerald Valley Estates with glossy flyers featuring stock photos of toxic sludge, screaming headlines like, "IS your family drinking poison?" Her narrative was classic manipulation. She claimed my cattle were contaminating the local creek with dangerous runoff, posing a biological hazard to the subdivision. And to prove it, she hired an environmental consultant named Dr. Arthur Penhaligon, a man who showed up in a white lab coat with official-looking green equipment to take water samples, while Victoria filmed him for her social media crusade. 30 years of filth, she narrated to her phone, standing on the banks of the creek where my herd had watered safely for decades. This community deserves better than living downstream from a toxic waste dump. The report Dr. Penhaligon produced was damning, claiming lethal levels of E. coli and demanding the immediate removal of my herd. But Julia taught me to trust nothing Victoria touched. A simple background check revealed that Dr. Penhaligon was actually Arthur Sterling, Victoria's brother-in-law, a man with a bankruptcy record and a bachelor's degree in marketing, whose certified laboratory was a laptop in his spare bedroom. I countered by bringing in the actual EPA, whose certified tests proved that my rotational grazing was actually improving water quality through natural filtration, while the Eve HOA's massive use of chemical fertilizers for their manicured lawns was the real source of pollution. When the local paper ran an expose revealing Victoria's fake scientist relative, the humiliation should have stopped her, but desperation makes predators dangerous. She escalated to physical sabotage, and that's when the war became personal. I woke up one gray morning to the smell of petroleum, discovering someone had poured motor oil into my water troughs, not enough to kill the herd, but enough to make the water undrinkable, forcing me to haul water from the well by hand. 2 days later, while I was at the cemetery placing fresh flowers on Eleanor's grave for her birthday, someone slashed all 4 tires on my truck, a calculated cruelty designed to kick me while I was grieving. But the final straw, the act that sealed her fate, was the security patrols. She hired a company called Obsidian Tactical to patrol the perimeter of my ranch, men in black uniforms who stood at my fence line with cameras, harassing my visitors, claiming they were protecting the subdivision from agricultural terrorism. When I found 2 of my calves limping with pellet gun wounds, non-lethal, but painful, I realized she wasn't just annoying, she was a criminal. Julia subpoenaed the financial records of the HOA and found that Victoria was embezzling community funds to pay these thugs, wiring money directly from the emergency reserve to an unlicensed security firm staffed by convicted felons. We were building a RICO case, a racketeering charge that carries mandatory prison time, but the legal system is slow, and Victoria was moving fast. An anonymous caller threatened to accidentally open my gates at night and let the herd wander onto the highway, forcing me to sleep in the barn with a shotgun, guarding the only things I had left. It was Julia who uncovered the true motive, the secret that turned this from a property dispute into a grand conspiracy. "Sit down, Red," she told me, her voice shaking with rage as she slid a stack of financial forensics across the table. "This isn't about a bike path. It never was. Victoria and her husband Harrison were broke. Their tech company was a shell game of investor fraud, and they were weeks away from total insolvency. They had cut a backroom deal with Horizon Corp, a massive developer, to sell my land and the surrounding area for a luxury expansion project worth millions. The bike path was actually the access road for a planned subdivision of 200 more mansions, and the only thing standing in their way was me. But it was darker than that. Julia found out that 25 years ago, my wife Eleanor, who worked as a paralegal before she retired, was the whistleblower who filed the original complaint that got Victoria disbarred in California. This wasn't just greed, it was revenge against a dead woman. Victoria had moved here, become HOA president, and targeted my land specifically to destroy the legacy of the woman who ruined her legal career, weaponizing my grief, poisoning the water near Eleanor's memorial grove, trying to erase every trace of my wife's existence. That realization turned my anger into ice. Julia coordinated with the FBI, specifically an Agent Kowalski, who saw enough evidence for immediate federal arrests, wire fraud, conspiracy, racketeering. They wanted to take her down publicly, and they learned that Victoria planned to use the upcoming annual town hall meeting to announce the seizure of my land via eminent domain, a fraudulent move that would serve as the trigger for her arrest. Julia looked at me and said, "We can arrest her, Red. We can take everything she owns, but I know you want something more." She was right. I wanted justice, yes, but I also wanted her to feel the raw power of the land she had disrespected. I wanted her to understand that you cannot bully nature without consequences. So, we hatched a plan that combined federal law enforcement with agricultural retribution. Victoria would drive her Tesla to the meeting, parking it next to the pasture fence as she always did to intimidate me. The FBI would be inside, waiting to slap cuffs on her. And outside, Kronos would be waiting, hungry, conditioned, and listening for the specific frequency of a Tesla panic alarm. I spent the final week perfecting the trap, installing remote-controlled gate actuators on the fence line, testing the release mechanism with my phone. I hired a videographer under the guise of filming a documentary, ensuring we had high-definition angles of the parking lot. I conditioned Kronos every evening, playing the alarm sound, watching him charge, feeding him molasses, turning him into a heat-seeking missile made of muscle and bone. The day before the meeting, Victoria tried one last desperate move, planting fake evidence of a meth lab in my barn and trying to bribe Sheriff Dalton to raid me. Dalton, a good man, wore a wire, capturing her bribery attempt on tape, adding another felony to the pile. She was digging her own grave with an excavator, and she had no idea the dirt was about to collapse on top of her. The stage was set, the trap was bailed, and the bull was hungry. The night of the annual Emerald Valley Estates meeting, the community center was packed to the rafters, a sea of 300 anxious faces. Victoria had arrived fashionably late, rolling up in her gleaming white Model X, parking it precisely where I knew she would, right next to the weakest section of my pasture fence, directly adjacent to the meeting hall. She stepped out, radiating that toxic confidence, checking her reflection in the window, completely unaware that she was walking into a federal buzzsaw. Inside, the air was heavy, smelling of stale coffee and nervous sweat. Sheriff Dalton and Agent Kowalski were positioned discreetly at the back, blending in with the crowd, while Julia and I sat near the front. Victoria took the podium, smiling that shark-like smile, and launched into her victory speech. "Tonight," she announced, "we celebrate the future, the removal of the blight on our community, and the beginning of the bike path that will modernize our lives." She clicked a remote, bringing up a rendering of my land paved over with concrete. That was Julia's cue. She stood up, holding a folder thick with indictments, and her voice cut through the room like a whip. "Victoria Sterling, I'm representing Silas Thorne. Would you like to explain to these people how you forged my client's signature? Or maybe how you stole nearly $1 million from the HOA reserve fund to pay for your husband's failed investments?" The room erupted. Victoria's face went from smug to ghostly pale in a heartbeat. "Lies," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is a conspiracy." "No, Victoria," Agent Kowalski boomed, stepping forward, badge flashing under the fluorescent lights. "It's a RICO predicate. You're under arrest for wire fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder." Panic, raw and animalistic, took over. Instead of surrendering, Victoria bolted. She shoved past a stunned neighbor and sprinted for the exit, bursting out into the cool night air, screaming for help, scrambling toward her Tesla as if the car could save her from the consequences of her own soul. She fumbled with her keys, hysterical, and did the one thing I had been praying for. She hit the panic button. The car began to scream. Chirp, 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 honk, honk. For 100 yards away, in the darkness of the pasture, Kronos lifted his massive head. He didn't hear a car alarm. He heard the dinner bell. I tapped the icon on my phone screen. The magnetic lock on the pasture gate clicked open. What happened next was captured in 4K resolution by 3 different cameras and is currently the most viewed clip in the history of agricultural justice. Kronos hit the parking lot like a runaway freight train, 2,200 pounds of black muscle moving with terrifying speed. Victoria was clawing at her door handle when she saw him, freezing in pure, primal terror. She scrambled away, diving behind a planter just as Kronos reached the source of the noise. He didn't just attack the car, he dismantled it. He hit the driver's side door with a force that buckled the frame, the sound of crunching metal echoing like a gunshot. He hooked his horns under the front bumper and lifted the front end of the luxury EV off the ground, shaking it like a terrier shakes a rat, smashing the windshield, trampling the hood, utterly obliterating the symbol of her arrogance while the crowd poured out of the community center, gasping, cheering, and filming. As Agent Kowalski dragged a weeping Victoria away in handcuffs, I walked up to the wreckage. The alarm finally died as the battery was crushed. I looked at her, then at the ruined car, and said, "Progress waits for no bull, darling." The fallout was absolute. Victoria was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison, and her assets, including the house, the remaining cars, and the hidden accounts, were seized to pay restitution to the HOA. Harrison got 5 years. The Horizon Corp deal collapsed instantly. But the real victory wasn't the prison sentences, it was the peace. The new HOA board, led by decent neighbors, signed a permanent conservation easement with me, ensuring that Ironwood Creek Ranch would remain agricultural land forever, protected from development. We used the settlement money to establish the Eleanor Thorne Agricultural Scholarship, sending kids to college to learn sustainable farming. I still walk out to the pasture every evening, watching the sunset paint the hills. Kronos is retired now, living his best life as a local celebrity, eating the finest hay money can buy. The silence is different now. It's not empty anymore. It's peaceful, but it leaves you with a question, doesn't it? We like to think the law protects us, that justice is blind. But if I hadn't had the money for a lawyer or the knowledge to fight back, Victoria would have won. She would have paved over my wife's memory and felt good about it. How many Victorias are out there right now, bulldozing people who can't fight back? And is it really justice if you have to rely on a 2,000-pound bull to get it? I don't know the answer. But I know one thing. Don't mess with a man's land, and never, ever underestimate a cow. Thanks for watching. If you're rooting for the bull, smash that like button and let me know in the comments. What's the craziest HOA story you've ever survived? Stay free, folks.